the congregations that is receiving a grant. And I think the main thing we're asking for is just a story of what happened after you used it, how it worked for you, so that we can share that with others. There will be another round. We used up most of the money, almost $15,000, about $13,000 in this first round. In the second round, we'll wait until we're done with the Minnesota Gives campaign, Minnesota Gives at Home campaign. I think we were at about 5,000 last I looked, and we hadn't even started the mail-in portion of that, so I'm confident we'll receive a significant amount more than that. But 50% of that amount will go towards additional loans. So be sure and apply for one of those grants if you have need of any kind. They are to expand your congregation's capacity to engage people in any kind of remote or digital or online way. And it's very broad. It can be used for equipment, for training, for software, for even for helping members get online. I mean, that's a very broad stroke and scope that we're using those grants for. So I want to welcome Pastor Keith Zay, your Director for Evangelical Mission. And Pastor Keith is going to share with us a report on how we're doing with our mission support.
And I do so with a full heart of gratitude for each of you, for all our congregations and servant leaders, and a thanks be to God. I get to witness firsthand the generosity that makes itself known and comes by way of the mail every day. It seems every day there's something in the mailbox. It's a check has been written. There's been a financial sharing for the ministries we share in. So I want to give you just a quick snapshot in time. With our first quarter just ended, and by the way, next week there'll be a mailing to our treasurers, our congregational treasurers, and I would invite you to check with your congregational treasurer, and if you would, just say thanks be to God for them, thank them for their ministry, but then you could also touch base with them, and your council, I'm sure, are aware of these things, but they will get a report about the giving that we've received as we understand it, that they can check to make sure that we're accurate in our receipts and what has been shared and given. And there's also a cover letter that would stipulate more about comparisons from last year to this year, some more information and a Thanksgiving. But I just want to give you a quick snapshot here. Last year, we had received at this time $302,989. And to date, now, a year later, in this moment we're in, $276,983. It's about 8.6% decrease. Decreases are decreases, but in the times we're living in, there's much to be thankful for without at the same time just getting, at least not acknowledging the challenges with that. I wanted to also share with you some contributing factors to this discrepancy. There are several congregations that in the first quarter of 2019 participated in giving, but have not yet in this first quarter that they didn't. And there's a variety of reasons to be sure for that in the times we're in. But as of today, we have 108 congregations that have participated, about 48%. And of those 108 congregations, 33 of them increased their first quarter giving compared to the year ago at that first quarter mark, for a total of $49,539.45. I had to double check this because there are 33 congregations that needed to decline, and I did a double check. Can this be 33 increase, 33 decrease? And the 33 decreases totaled up to $59,866.89. To date, we have 115 congregations, about 52%, that have yet to participate. Now, we know that in our synod, year in and year out, as part of the ebb and flow, we just know this, that a majority, that final quarter of the fiscal year, November, December, and January, is a significant time for us as a church. So it's not that far off first quarter to first quarter in terms of participation, but it has been impacted in the times that we're living in, and that's understandable. I marvel at all the ways that the faithfulness is being lived out, and we're trusting and hoping as congregations, first and foremost, are sustaining ministry that's vital, that we can do that together as a synod, and that we're there for each other. And with that said, I just want to lift up again. I'm going to give you a phone number if you want to write it down, and you can call anytime. And I'll usually answer if I put the ringer on, if I remember to put the ringer on. 218-790-1764. That's my cell phone number. You've got it. Don't hesitate. And also our stewardship table. We've got some wonderful servant leaders that have a passion and expertise in stewardship. And we've got resources, and especially some people, and we can come alongside and think out loud and wonder as we move into this year. So I just wanted to lift that up and give that invite. And I will answer the phone, although I did share with my colleagues, Bill, I don't know if I dare say this. I was on the phone the other day and I panicked because I couldn't find my cell phone. I was distracted in the call I was making, and I was on my cell phone. I don't know if I should share that with you. It's probably not good, but
I've done that.
Yeah. So there's my report, gang.
So Keith, was that number 218?
218-790-1764. That's my cell.
I just shared it with everybody on the chat.
Okay.
You're going to get all kinds of, delightful text messages, and you're so lucky. All right. Thanks, Keith. And I really appreciate being in ministry with Pastor Keith, and we've been doing this work together in different ways for quite a long time. And what a joy it's been. So I want to just talk about some opportunities coming up. We are going to be producing a full-fledged worship service from the Synod staff for June 7th, which is Trinity Sunday. We're hoping that you'll make use of that and give your pastor a day off, or your SAM or rostered minister, or whoever, wherever it is you're getting worship from, give them a day off that Sunday. We'll include a little spot in the middle for you to insert your offering information, so that you can get that in there. However you're doing that, but there'll be a way for you to drop your link in there pretty easily. Or you can do it at the end if that's easier for you, but we'll offer some instructions with that. So that'll be Holy Trinity Sunday. I won't be the preacher though. Actually, presiding Bishop Elizabeth Eaton will be our preacher on Holy Trinity Sunday. So I'm excited about that. And the rest of our staff and I will lead the worship, and we'll do it. We'll have it all put together by Red River Leadership for us. And so I think it'll be a quality product that you can use. And if you're not enslaved to the lectionary, you can even use it at other times if you like. But we hope that it's helpful to you. So I will be producing a sermon for Memorial Day. I feel like I feel a sense of calling to preach on that particular day with my other calling in life to serve in the military, and with the ways in which we have public servants who are sacrificing themselves in this particular time. I believe that our Memorial Day message is timely. And so I'll be offering a sermon, not a whole service, but just a sermon that you can use in either in worship or in some other way that you find helpful in your congregation. And then also by the middle of next week, I'll make available a very brief message to our young people who are experiencing a lot of losses, and in their short lives, what feel like maybe tragic losses for them, in terms of lost graduations, lost summer job opportunities, sporting opportunities. I was a basketball dad, and I coached my daughter's basketball team from the time they were in 3rd grade until they got too good for me when they were in about 7th grade, and then handed them off to a better coach. And those five of those 13 girls went on to win the state championship when they were seniors. And I remember how each year that team was getting better and better, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior year. And I can just imagine how devastating it would have been for those girls to have lost their senior year season. And I know that has happened for a lot of our young people who are looking at this as a chance to show their skills to scouts to college scouting, an opportunity to finally take that next step as a team, or just a great opportunity to be together as a team in their last year. So just a lot of things that our kids are missing out on, and I want to have a message for them. So let's see. Yep. I want to update you on the guidance. Last week, I shared a letter that was basically that letter was like our devotion for tonight, which was we're really not close to being ready to reopen in Minnesota for large gatherings. President Trump's guidance for phase 1, which is when reopening starts. Phase 1 is that there must be 2 weeks of declining symptoms before phase 1 can begin, or declining symptoms and declining cases, reported cases. Here in Minnesota, we're still seeing daily increases, and we don't expect to see the peak until the middle of June. And so that means that at best case scenarios that we enter phase 1, which is the first phase of reopening, in early July. And phase 1 looks a lot like our current situation. Fewer than 10, wearing face masks, socially distanced, with proper sanitation. Not exactly an inviting or encouraging environment for most of our congregations to be worshiping in. And then you'll recall after another 14 days, so 28 days of declining symptoms and cases, then we enter phase 2, and that's where we move to 50. At-risk populations, 65 and older, and people with underlying health conditions, still sheltering in place, right? And then 14 days after that, 20, so now we're into 42 days after we started phase 1. We enter phase 3, and that's when things start to look a little bit more normal. And if you do that math, and everything works out great, and we don't have any setbacks, then we're into the fall before we're really back to anything that looks like normal. And for our congregations that worship more than 50, it's still going to be a little bit longer than that. So what I've realized in visiting, and I was on a call with the governor after our conversation last week, and on the call with our commissioner for public health, and they indicated that they do not have guidance ready for churches because they feel it's a ways off. I talked with our Minnesota bishops. We have 6 bishops here in Minnesota, and we're all in agreement that we're not ready to produce guidance because we don't know exactly what the Minnesota guidance will be. We think we'll know in the next days, or at most week or so, in terms of what the exact numbers will be as we move from one phase to the next, because those can be state specific. They'll follow closely President Trump's guidelines for the plan for reopening America, but they won't necessarily be exactly the same. And so we feel like what we want to do as Minnesota bishops together is produce common guidance for all of Minnesota. And so that's our goal. I'll be honest with you, I wish, I'm glad we're doing that, but I also wish we could do it faster, because I am aware even though there's not urgency in the sense that we should be opening soon, we should not be. There is a desire to start planning, and I get that. So there are some resources out there, and we're going to start putting some on our website, just just more general resources, not specific guidance, but just some resources to aid your planning right now. The Dakotas have produced some guidance, which are somewhat applicable to our situation. The Catholic Church has some guidance, which is somewhat applicable to our situation. And none other than the United States Air Force has guidance for their chapels, which I think is applicable as well. So we will make that available, but we'll, with the understanding that this is not the official guidance that we are offering as a synod. It's just resources that you can use in this early phase to plan. So I just want to pause there and see what questions you might have.
Bishop Tesh, Laurel from Augustana and Fergus. Is what you just said to us something that you could post publicly in a more formal way out there where our members can go and hear that directly from you? I think there's a sense that people want to know that this is coming. I mean, we can say it till we're blue in the face that this is the direction we're getting from the synod, and I agree completely with everything you're saying. But is what you just told us and how you explained it something that you could provide us as a resource in video form that we can share with our members?
Yeah, sure, I can do that.
In a really basic way. I mean, what you just said, I think would be really helpful that people hear it from you too.
Okay. Chris, can we do that? Okay, Chris is nodding, so yes. So add that to the list of videos I'm producing this week. This is going to be video production week. I'm really glad I bought a new microphone. You'll all actually be able to hear me when I speak and preach this time. Thanks for that suggestion, Laurel. I think that's a good idea. From a congregation earlier today, when we live on the North Dakota, why can't we open when North Dakota is opening? Well, we can't open when North Dakota is opening because we are not North Dakota. And what even the governor of North Dakota has said, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And that's, one of our more, I would say, in terms of reopening, more generous states about reopening. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. You need to look at it's the rare congregation, especially those that are going to be near that North Dakota-Minnesota border, where a high percentage of the population of your people that would show up for worship are in the high-risk category, which even under North Dakota rules, they would be encouraged to stay at home. So there's a congregation in Calgary, Canada, that decided to reopen. And there's an article in the Calgary, I don't know, it's the Calgary Times, it's a Calgary newspaper. And it's from the leader of that congregation expressing regret about that because they now have 19 cases. They're now at the center of the outbreak in their town, and 2 people have died. So another thing that you need to hear as presidents is that it's not clear where the liability for that lies. Our ELCA General Counsel believes that it's quite possible that courts could find that liability lies with the congregation. If the congregation and its leaders choose to reopen too early, and they create an environment that's considered unsafe because it's not following guidelines, it's possible that there could be liability for the congregation. So that's something to take into consideration as well. And the way you can solve that is it's a simple phone call. Call your insurance carrier and ask, are we going to be covered if we reopen and people get sick? Will you cover us? And they might say, yeah, no matter what, we will. Great, you got a great carrier. Or they might say, as long as you're following all the guidelines, that, in your state, then yes. Or so you need to call your carrier before you do anything around reopening. So I'd be interested in your reactions, responses, questions about that.
That's going to be a hard nut to crack for our congregations, because I've already got members saying, well, how come we can't get together yet? As much as we want to get together, common sense says that we shouldn't, but there'll be some backlash from it, I'm sure.
I know there will. I know this is hard, and it's going to get harder before it gets easier. It will get easier someday, but it's going to get harder before it gets easier. So maybe a question to ask is, what has changed about COVID-19? There's still no treatment. There's still no cure. There's still no vaccination. What's changed since the time when you agreed that we needed to be safe? So I don't know if that helps. I'm trying to give you some bullet points that you can use in your leadership. So the liability question is a big one. At the end of the day, usually people will agree that if there's liability for us, we better not take the risk. And I'm not saying there is. I'm not an attorney. I'm telling you, our ELCA general counsel has said he believes there could be liability there, but the place to figure it out is with your insurance provider. Just call them up and ask them what your coverage is. So hopefully this is helpful. I have a video I want to show, but it's about 15 minutes long, and it's edited down from a 42-minute presentation from Dr. Mike Osterholm with a group of ELCA leaders talking about the issue of reopening. And I think it's a helpful video, and I'm wondering if, before we jump into that, if there's any other questions.
Yeah, Dan Christensen from Kansas City, Trinity Lutheran.
Yep.
Some of the churches around are starting to use FM services and having people stay in cars. What's the thoughts on that? How is that working? What do we need to do to be safe on that situation?
Yeah, Chris, we have some resources on that, don't we, on parking lot worship?
Yeah, it's on our COVID-19 resource page. I will look under what category it's under, and I'll put it in the comment section. And then someone had asked for the Minnesota specific churches can't be open, and I put in there the link from Minnesota. The CDC has some better things, I think personally, of guidelines, but for the Minnesota specific, I put that link in there. So when I find out where that parking lot, what resource link it's under, but I do have a link to the parking lot resource. But essentially, like, the first 3 points are don't do it. And then if you're going to do it, continue on. So, but yeah, I'll put that in the comment section just so we can move on with our agenda.
Yeah, the state guidance, it's actually state guidance from the state of Minnesota on parking lot worship. And that's true. The first couple of bullets are, it's safer to stay home. But if you're going to do it, here's how you do it. The other thing, I just want to address that issue. So no one's going to arrest you if you have a worship service. And I don't have any authority to make you not do it. We're trying to provide guidance that you can use to make a good decision for your community. And so the question out there, where does it say that churches can't be open? There's guidance that says they should not be, but there's no guidance, there's no law that says they can't be, at least not yet. The governor's order hasn't gone that far. Okay. So separation of church and state issue, at least so far it is. Back in 1918, the municipalities closed down the churches. Actually, they led the way and would not allow, they would actually have the police preventing people from entering worship spaces. Let's see, just a little factoid for you. I want to show you that video. Any other questions before we? Outdoor services. So the studies are showing that outdoor services, that outdoors are, as long as you're still distancing and everything, which is easier to do outside, it's pretty safe. The chances of you catching it, well, you're going to hear it from Dr. Osterholm, same thing, are pretty low outside. But all of you, what you need to know is that from a liability standpoint, all the official guidance, both from the CDC and from the state, does not differentiate between outdoors and indoors. So let's see. I'm going to show you that video now. I hope I don't lose you. I think it's good. I think you'll appreciate it.
We are honored today to welcome Dr. Michael Osterholm to provide insight for the decisions we must make. You probably recognize Dr. Osterholm from his appearances on NBC, CNN, Fox News, PBS, Minnesota Almanac, and you probably read his articles in the New York Times. An authority respected around the world, his home is in Minnesota. He's the McKnight Presidential Endowed Chair in Public Health at the University of Minnesota and the director of its Center for Infectious Disease Research and Policy.
So we've expected more influenza pandemics. We actually had one in 2009, which was a relatively mild one, a new strain that emerged. It emerged in late March, early April, H1N1 in Mexico. Spread through North America, and that early spring peak went away for reasons we have no idea why. And then it came back in early September with the big peak in October, and then went away on its own again, and then eventually became a seasonal flu virus. So when this coronavirus first emerged in Wuhan, China, at the time there was a sense, well, this is not going to cause a pandemic. There are other coronaviruses that occurred called SARS and MERS, where in both of those illnesses, very serious, by the way, but the people were not really that infectious until about the 5th or 6th day of illness. Once we understood that, and we were able to eliminate the animal reservoir in the case of SARS in the Guangdong province markets, we could stop it, and we did. We literally stopped SARS in about 6 months, and it disappeared. MERS is a bit of a different situation. That is a virus associated with camels on the Arabian Peninsula, where there's 1.7 million camels on that peninsula who are infected with this. They don't get seriously ill, and they occasionally transmit to humans. And we keep seeing MERS cases occur there, this Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome. But again, like SARS, you're not infectious till about the 5th or 6th day. And at that point, you can get people isolated, identify the contacts, follow up, and we can handle it quite well. So when this new SARS-like virus occurred in Wuhan, and the cases started growing, our initial reaction was, well, this must be like SARS or MERS. We'll get this thing under control, somewhat quickly. Well, within a matter of a week to 10 days, some of us who are quite involved in analyzing the data realized this was not SARS or MERS. This was acting very much like a flu virus. And in fact, we hypothesized in even the earliest days that probably a lot of the transmission occurred in people before they were sick, or if they did get sick, in the earliest days of their illness. Some people likely didn't get sick at all. And that was why on January 20th, our center actually put out a document saying this would be a worldwide pandemic. There was no way we're going to contain this in China, that it was going to spread around the world. The first week of February, we laid out a scenario where because of the time from when you get exposed to you get sick is about 5 days, which is about twice the length of influenza, and you transmit on average to at least 2 people. If you think about it, you have 1 person on day 1, you have 2 people on day 5, 4 people on day 10, you get the numbers, and you go 2, 4, 1632, and we figured it would take literally about a month before the world would recognize that this was spreading through the world. Well, the end of February, early March, we realized what was happening and away it went. Since that time, we have seen outbreaks throughout the world and what's happening. So what's going to happen with this? Where is it going to go? Well, first of all, we know that those highest at risk of having serious illness are those who are older, over age 65 typically, those who have underlying health conditions, heart disease, renal disease, those who have had blood cancers or certain kind of lung cancers, and unfortunately for our country, also those who are obese. And even on the younger age groups, we're seeing right now a major increased occurrence of serious illnesses and intensive care medicine. What you're seeing right now is, in fact, the earliest stages of this pandemic, meaning that what it's going to do is likely unfold for months to come. We estimate that about 5 to 15% of the U.S. population has been infected to date. That number will not slow down in any way, shape, or form, short of us shutting down until it gets to 60 or 70%. That's what we know in what we call herd immunity, when there's enough infected people who recover who have immunity, which at this point, we don't know if that's absolutely certain, but we believe it to be, at least in the short term, where they're immune. And then when those people are immune, they're like rods in the virus reaction, they slow it down. But even then, it will continue to transmit. Now, the only other way to get to that 60 or 70% other than natural infection, some people getting severely ill and dying, is a vaccine. And you're going to hear a lot about vaccines coming up. I'll just be really frank and honest with you. We don't know if we can get a vaccine. The reason is I think that this could be very difficult. I surely think that anyone who talks about a January timeline of having a vaccine means that we can actually have one that could possibly be available, but to manufacture millions to billions of doses, to distribute them, et cetera, is going to take months. And this, of course, we're living on virus time right now, not human time. And so I think what's going to happen over the course of the next months is the virus will continue to do what it does. Now, in terms of what might happen with these cases going forward, I would just say right now, we just put out a document last week that's received a fair amount of attention from our center. We lay out 3 scenarios, basically, to get us from 5 to 15% to that 60 to 70% level. One is it will look like an influenza pandemic, where this set of cases we see will start to level off. People will become very excited about the fact that we've won. It'll be quiet potentially for several months, and then all hell will break loose. And we could have a major peak that could far dwarf anything we've seen. If you tell that to the people in New York, they can't believe that because they've already been through so much, but that's the case. We estimate in New York, we're no higher than 15% positive in that entire metropolitan area, which means they have a long ways to go to get to 60 to 70%. The second possibility is that it could be one where we just see a lot of what I call foothill bumps, where it'll flare up here, it'll flare up there, it'll flare up here, and it will keep trying to tamp it down with our distancing and so forth. But in fact, it will just keep going until it gets to 60, 70%. Or we may just see, I don't think this is the case, a slow burn, where we just keep seeing case after day after day after day, and then eventually it will get to that 60, 70% level. If you ask me which one of those scenarios, I couldn't tell you. I just know, like gravity works for physical items, viral gravity works for this virus. It will keep working to find people. Countries that are reported have had this under control. So with that, Bishop, I'm happy to end it and take questions however you'd like to go with it.
Oh, yes, we have several questions, but first, thank you so much for that very succinct and important reality check about what is happening. Okay, most of us serve in congregations where we have members with lots of opinions. If you could imagine yourself pastoring a congregation, how would you express your opinion regarding gathering together in the building in person for worship once again?
This is a real challenge. And I say that because transmission is through what we call aerosols. If you could have been in this room that I'm in, my office, my home office right now. And I hadn't been in here all day. I have been since 4 this morning, but if I hadn't been, just in the time I was talking to you, if I could use a glow light to show you what this room would look like, it would be full of particles, just from me talking. Think about what an aerosol is. Remember the last time you saw the sunlight coming through the windows in your house and you saw that dust floating? You thought, oh, my house is so dusty, I need to clean. Those are aerosols. When you go to the department store, if they're existing after this whole thing, you're 4 aisles away from the perfume section and you smell it. That's an aerosol. So the challenge we have is that, we have grossly overstated in public health the role of hygiene as it relates to hand washing and surfaces. And part of that comes from the fact because people want to glom onto that because they believe it's something you can do. But if you look at the scientific data, it's breathing the air. And so from that standpoint, you have to think about anybody you bring together. And I mentioned this before, we now know that people are most infectious likely in the 2 days before they get sick. So you can't even sit there and screen on that. Fever has been a notably unreliable way to screen. You can say people wear masks. Well, that's not helpful largely for 2 reasons. One is the kind of mask you have to wear to actually stop transmission would be what we call an N95. A respirator that's tight face fitting around your face. Basically, all the air comes through the matrix. These N95s are actually poured. It's not paper. It's a poured material that hardens and allows air through that catches the virus. In that regard, we can't have the general public using these. We are so short of supply right now. We need to save them for the healthcare workers who are on the front lines with very high levels of virus in those rooms. Still, we're losing healthcare workers every day, literally dying from being on the job. So we're left with surgical masks, which we're running short of too, and then cloth masks. And surgical masks were never meant to protect the individual who wears them. They were meant to basically be a surgeon protecting you as the patient from them dripping down into your wound. But then we found that there were things called droplets, large particles, that when you did cough or you did sneeze would fall usually within 6 feet of you. That's where you often get the 6-foot rule. There surely are virus particles in those droplets, and a surgical mask can help stop that. But the problem is where there's droplets, there's also aerosols. So they're within the 6 feet too. And aerosols will come in right through the cracks on the side of the mask where you're breathing. You don't breathe through the material, you breathe through the sides where they're open. They're not tight face fitting. And so surgical masks are designed better than cloth masks. Cloth masks, and I have served on a National Academy of Science committee on this. We have documents on our website looking at this. Cloth masks have never shown to have any impact on transmission. It's become an emotional issue. I get more hate mail literally because I won't endorse cloth masks as a way to stop transmission. And the reason I don't is because we also have evidence that people who wear cloth masks think they're now protected and they don't do the social or physical distancing they should do. And so it is counterintuitive, but they may actually hurt you by having that because, again, it comes in the air. The original thought was when the CDC recommended them, which actually came from a White House initiative, was that, well, if you're asymptomatic, meaning no symptoms, and you're going to be out and about, at least that'll help keeping you from spreading it to others. And if you're coughing, it will. But remember, you're not supposed to be out if you're coughing. But if you breathe in and out, it'll come right out the sides of the mask. So I would like to be able to give you a prescription to say, just wear a cloth mask, don't shake hands, stay apart. That's not going to work. One of the more notable outbreaks, as some of you may be aware of, there was an outbreak in the Seattle area with this early days where a church choir got together for practice. One of the individuals was asymptomatically infected, and without touching, they did not touch, they kept distance apart while they were practicing. No one shook hands or hugged, and 42 of the 61 people were infected in that event. That gives you a sense of what we're talking about and why that's a big challenge. So I would say your gatherings, I don't know when to tell you that you can get together.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very, and so as the pastor, if you had to answer that in 30 seconds, you would say, we're not going to get together for the foreseeable future.
You know, if we see virus levels drop to almost no transmission in the next few months, then I'd say you may have a temporary respite where the chances are very low. But if that happens, that's the worst sign. That's the very same as being in the eye of a hurricane, is the back wall that nails you hardest. Because if we have very few cases this summer, I can almost guarantee you we're going to have one hell of a wave this fall, because that will be fitting the influenza model completely. And that's what we worry about. I'd rather see cases continue on, because we're going to get to 60 or 70% no matter what. I mean, there's no beam me up Scotty machine here that's going to avoid gravity. Okay.
So just to be clear, if there is a respite and people can worship together, do we allow singing? Do we allow Holy Communion?
You know, I don't think communion is the problem. And as I've said, environmentally, I don't think it is. It's a problem for a whole lot of other reasons, okay? There are a lot of other viruses that we transmit with the common cup. But I don't think this is one that we have to worry about. I worry more about if you're handing out communion, again, if you really have people who are infected, you're all close together. But as I've already shared with you, if you have 25 people, even in a moderate sized church, you got a lot of aerosol in there. Okay, so I mean, it's at some point you just have to decide that, you know, this is low enough level for us to accept and to move on. And I wish I had a way magically to tell you what that is. I don't. Choir singing, clearly choirs are very good ways to project, you know, aerosols and virus. But again, if the risk is very, very low, we're hardly seeing any cases, then I think that's a legitimate question to have. And, you know, you have to let people make that decision. I think on their own with you. I mean, really part of it, leadership of the church, but at the same time, I mean, if they want to come, they can if nobody's forcing them to.
So our past
So sobering. That was a 15-minute excerpt of a 42-minute video presentation on Zoom. Couple of things I want to say about that. One is, I think our job as leaders, one of the things that he said that I did cut out was that the most important thing in a pandemic has always been and is today, it's not medicine or a cure, it's leadership. It's leadership in a pandemic that saves lives and that helps people get through it. And you are doing exactly what you need to do as leaders. First of all, you're letting people know what the risks are and why we're staying at home and why we're following the governor's orders. You're letting them know from a scientific perspective, but also from a faith perspective. We know that God is with us even though we're at home. We know that God's word is active and alive and calling people to faith, even when it comes to us over Zoom or over Facebook Live or over YouTube. And we know that God is with us in the midst of this. So we come at it from a faith perspective. We come at it from a discipleship perspective. We're called to love our neighbor. And even though you or I might not feel personally at risk, we know that if we behave recklessly, lives will be lost, maybe not our own, but those of our neighbors. And so as leaders, you're sharing that message. It's exactly what needs to happen. And then we're helping people cope by providing resources like this one, by figuring out ways to connect with folks, to be physically distant yet socially connected and spiritually connected. And I'm really proud of our leaders that are working hard to find ways to do that. And you are too. And that's happening. We are going to come to the end of this. This exile will end, and it won't be 70 years. It probably won't even be 1 year, but it might be a few months shy of a year. And so we do have to learn how to thrive as God's people in this time. And we've already demonstrated that we're capable of doing that. So, questions?
I guess Laurel from Augustana. I had seen the video this weekend. A congregation member had sent it to me, and so I actually shot an email off to our insurance agent while it was playing, and he called me, and so I just got off the phone with our Lutheran Trust rep, and he's telling me that they've come down with Lutheran Trust as saying they feel there's no liability to the congregations.
Good.
Which, you know, I think that's good and bad, but he's saying not that you can't get sued for it, but they don't feel that you will be found liable, which is different than what I'm hearing from you, Bishop Tesh, and other things I've read. And so I don't necessarily feel reassured by it because they wouldn't clarify the coverage really. So I'm a little hesitant on that reaction from him, but it was interesting that it was the exact opposite perspective of what's coming out of the General Counsel of the ELCA.
Yeah, and I would say our general counsel of the LA hasn't said anything definitive. He hasn't said you are liable. He said, we believe that there is a case that can be made that you would be liable, because most policies have a negligence rules. Like, you're covered as leaders as long as you don't engage in activities that are clearly and obviously negligent. And it seems to me it'd be pretty easy to make a case that if you regather as a community and you drive that ship in that direction, and you do it in such a way that's ignoring guidelines, then there's a case that can be made around negligence. I'm not an attorney, and I don't have a crystal ball. That's why I'm saying you should first and foremost, before you open, even when we're rolling into phase one, you want to check with your insurance carrier. What is our liability here if we open?
I agree with you, Bishop Tesh, and I think even if that's their case, I think we still, as officers, need to be aware that we have some personal liability too, and just be very cautious, no matter what our insurance company says about following the guidelines.
Yep. And at the end of the day, I guess I wouldn't let fear of liability drive the ship. I mean, it's an important consideration, and I know that in some cases when you're trying to persuade people, it can be persuasive, but our reasons for doing it should ultimately rest upon just our own sense of how do we keep people safe and fulfill our mission as a congregation. Right now, the way we're doing that is just the way we're doing it right now. And we're being pretty effective in it. So.
Yes, Bishop Bill.
Yes.
We're up in the northwestern corner of Minnesota here, where most people think we're at the end of the world. And I'm just wondering if I can, earlier you talked about the 2 weeks of declining symptoms, and then another 2 weeks up to 52 days. Is there a copy of that policy out there somewhere so I could get that out in our monthly newsletter to send out to the congregation?
Yeah, it is actually, that's President Trump's policy. It's the guidelines for reopening.
I'm having a hard time reading my notes here, so that is.
No, that's okay. It's the guidelines
policy.
Yeah, it's on our website. It's the guidelines for reopening America, and there it's a 3-phase rollout, and there's guidelines for activities and that are allowed or that are recommended or not recommended in each of the phases. So if you can click, we have a link on our website, or you can just Google guidelines for reopening America, and
that'll work.
It'll take you.
I would like to get that out to our congregation.
I think that's a good idea. And I think it's important to let people know that this is not guidelines that are coming from just anybody. This guideline, which is not necessarily the Minnesota guidelines, right? We don't know what those are going to be yet, but they are the president's, and they're way more restrictive than what most people think the president is saying.
And I know in discussion with Pastor Kathy Rhodes up here is we've had a lot of discussion over this, and said, well, we don't want to be contributors to it. So if we need to just shut down and step back for a while, we will. Sure, it hurts the bottom line. I mean, no doubt about it. I'm sure it's hurting everybody right now. And what,
Yeah.
what it's going to take. We don't want to have that black eye. We'll step back and we'll just follow all the guidelines. And
I think that's wise. And I also think it's also wise to not overdo the guidelines, right? I mean, when it's safe to enter phase one, following the guidelines, enter phase one. When it's safe to enter phase two, and the public health officials in your area say it's phase two, we're now starting phase two, then enter phase two, following all of the precautions and guidelines. Now, I think a lot of us, if it were me, if I were a pastor in a church right now, I would say, what's the sense of doing phase one? It's going to be pretty dull and a very non-inspiring worship service with 9 of us in masks and standing 6 feet apart. We can't sing. You know, so I'd probably wait till phase two before I'd even think about it. But that's going to be a case by case decision.
I know Easter Sunday we did a drive-in service and that went over real well.
I bet it did. And as long as people actually stay in their cars, arrive as households, depart as households, it's very safe.
Yeah. Okay, well, I guess what you're telling us is follow the government guidelines
And we will try to keep you abreast of what those are. And
that'd be awesome. Yes.
And then we will interpret them for our churches when we have good guidance. And our goal is to have something that's coming from all 6 bishops in Minnesota, ELCA bishops. In the meantime, I think it'll be helpful for us to just get some resources that you can use. And Chris, we'll just write those in a way that we understand that these are not guidance. These are just some, as you start your initial planning for that day that's quite a ways off yet, you might hear some things to keep in mind.
Bishop Bill, there is a question on how people are handling council meetings, whether it's in Zoom. And so some people are commenting that, yep, we're having Zoom. But yeah, that's been one question. And I've, James, who was just speaking, I did put in the link to the opening. It's called Opening Up America Again. And it is on our COVID-19 site. Will the PPP be extended beyond the 2 months? Do you have any insight from that, Bishop Bill?
I doubt the money will still be there after 2 months, but I mean, I guess we'll see. It's all up to Congress whether they authorize more funding or not.
Do you anticipate giving any revised guidelines to communion with this extended shutdown for everyone, or staying the same path we have right now? And then secondly, do you have any feedback for youth groups that are smaller than a size of 10? Should they be allowed to start gathering, or youth events that are smaller, or youth directors meeting with kids? Where is the Synod on guidelines on that?
So we're not in phase one yet. And so our guidance would be that people should not be gathering. The only people who should be gathering in some groups smaller than 9, there's really 3 groups. One is people that are there to produce a worship service. And there the guidance is only as few as necessary. And to produce a service that can be, electronically. And people have been doing a great job of that. The other group would be folks that are there for a funeral. That's fewer than 10. I have a dear friend that just wrote an article. He's actually the command chaplain for United States Air Combat Command. He's a Catholic priest. Just did the funeral for his dad. Couldn't say mass. Had to have 9 people could be there. They've got more kids in the family than that. So, that's a hard thing, but that's where we're at right now. And anyway, right now it would not be the recommendation that youth groups would gather, but when we roll into phase one, it's possible that youth groups could gather in groups smaller than 10 with proper social distancing and somebody monitoring that. I mean, But yes, we will have specific guidance around communion. It won't be like, do it like this. It will be more like questions like, have you thought about how you're going to maintain proper distancing, how you're going to ensure that the sacrament is safe? We'll have some suggestions for that. And we'll also, the Catholic Church has produced some good guidance. As you can imagine, it's very detailed, very specific, very directive, but it's scientifically based. And that's a resource for us. It's not our guidance, but it would be a resource. Okay. I remember, man, it was 13, 14 years ago now when I was last in the parish as a senior pastor at a fairly large congregation. And we often found it necessary to hold council meetings via teleconference. We found a way to do it back then when we didn't even have this opportunity to look at each other. So it's very possible to do meetings remotely, and most people are figuring out a way to do that.
How about having this is Susan from Wheaton. How about having a congregational meeting to vote on something?
Yeah, there's about 3 ways to do that. And there again, those resources are on our website.
Okay.
So one is actually the most promising one I found recently is actually doing a parking lot meeting with the FM radio. But you can also do it via Zoom. You have to make sure that your constitution allows for it. And so you have to first of all, you have to make sure your constitution does not prohibit it. If it prohibits it, then you just can't do it. Most constitutions do not prohibit it. But if your constitution does not allow for it, then your council would meet via Zoom or some other medium to pass a continuing resolution allowing for congregational meetings that are conducted via some other format than the traditional format. And then you could go ahead and do that via Zoom. And then you just have to think through, how are we going to do voting? And you might have to sacrifice some anonymity in order to do a voting. But there's some suggestions about how to do voting there as well. And that's still on our website, right, Chris?
Yes, I'm looking to see what category it's under since it's not all on the same page. It's not easy for me to find everything quickly all the time. One thing I did want to lift up is last week someone asked about some very step-by-step guidance on how to log into Zoom for someone who's maybe never done it before. And that is on our social media, that link. And so once I find quickly, as I'm looking right now, where that guidance is to how to have a meeting, I'll stick that in the group chat as well.
Just so you know, this is Scott at Eagle Lake Lutheran. We are planning a congregational meeting for this next Sunday via Zoom. And I think we have most of the wrinkles ironed out, so it will go smoothly. You know, our greatest challenge is that most of our congregation is more mature. And so for them to grasp the technology of Zoom, surprisingly, quite a few of them have, but there are quite a few that are scared of it too. So, but we are doing one Sunday, so I can let you know how it goes next time we meet.
Good, thank you. We've had congregations call a pastor via Zoom. I mean, it can happen. It's just, you get a little creative. Minnesota, we're fortunate to be in a state that allows for that. There are states that statutes do not allow for virtual meetings, in which case you just wait. All right. Well, this has been an excellent conversation. Thank you again for your leadership. Sometimes I kind of feel like I'm preaching to the choir here, because I know that there are there are folks out there that feel strongly that we should just get back to worship and, you know, as fast as we can. And if that's your neighbors, I encourage you to be in conversation with them and encourage them to call me if that's helpful. So I know Pastor Carla is on the call. Pastor Carla, before we go, A, would you pray us out at the end? And B, is there anything that you want to add? Pastor Carla Mickelson, our Synod associate to the Bishop for Synod Administration.
I just want to continue to give thanks for all the work that you all are doing in how you support your congregation and how you support your pastors and how you support your communities. And I think Chris and Bill and I and Keith and everybody on staff has heard absolutely marvelous stories. And so check those stories out on Facebook. I know Chris puts stuff up there all the time. And if you've got a story to tell, let her know, because it's amazing how the Holy Spirit is working even in these challenging times. So let us pray. Good and gracious God, we give you thanks for this day. We thank you most especially today for the leaders of our congregations. We thank you for their care and concern for the people in which they serve. We thank you for their due diligence in trying to keep people safe and also trying to keep people connected and connected to the church and to one another. We ask for your continued guidance and for your loving kindness, that we have patience with one another as these days grow long, that we continue to feel your outpouring of love and that we can share that love with our neighbors who are hurting and in need. We know that this economy needs to get moving, and we know that people are suffering because they have been furloughed or have lost jobs, but we also know that life is very, very precious and very, very vulnerable. So we ask that you help us find a way to balance those things, and that you be with us always in steadfast and abiding presence. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. God's peace be with you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.